I'm going to turn myself in for a crime I was involved in years ago, and somebody lost their life. It was murder.
On May 7th, 1993, the Reading Police Department received a missing persons report from Donnell Tadich. Donnell indicated that her fiancé, Frank McAllister, had borrowed the car the day before and had not returned.
Donnell reported that Frank had gotten in a vehicle accident a few months prior, totaled his car, and received a $5,000 insurance settlement from that case. So he had just cashed that insurance check the day that he went missing.
That night, we received a call from employees of the Costco in Reading. They had reported a vehicle in the parking lot. It had been there for 2 nights, and it appeared abandoned.
The driver's side window was down, the vehicle was unlocked, the keys were still in the ignition.
She noticed bloodstains on the outside of the vehicle, and the license plate was able to connect that vehicle as belonging to Donnell Tadich. There was a significant amount of blood down the driver's door, the armrest, and down the inside part of the door.
A white t-shirt that was on the floorboard behind the driver's side seat. It had a significant amount of blood on it. And then a backpack had some newspaper sticking out of it that had blood on it as well. Detectives contacted Donnell. Donnell tells detectives that Frank was working as a cook at a local restaurant. They had also just gotten engaged. They were gonna elope in Reno and get married and start a life together. She said that Frank had dabbled in the use of narcotics, specifically methamphetamine. So he told Donnell that he wanted to purchase a large sum of methamphetamine and then sell that methamphetamine for a profit.
With suspicions of a drug deal gone wrong, detectives reach out to the friends that Frank's fiancée Donnell says he was heading to see when he borrowed her car. 17-year-old Shauna Culver and her brother, 21-year-old Curtis Culver.
Shauna told detectives that she last saw Frank on the afternoon of May 6th, that Shauna and Curtis were hanging out at their apartment. Brian Hawkins was there. And Shauna, Curtis, Frank, and Brian all got in Frank's car and drove around Reading just kind of hanging out. Shauna told detectives that Frank had gotten a text on his pager, and he made a phone call from a payphone. After he made the call, he got back in the car and he told Shauna, Curtis, and Brian that he needed to meet with somebody and it was urgent and that he would have to drop them off in town at another location, but he would come back and pick them up after he was done meeting this person. Shauna, Curtis, and Brian hung out there for a while and realized that Frank probably wasn't coming back, and Shauna said that they ended up catching a taxi back to their mom's apartment.
Detectives interview Curtis Culver and Shauna's boyfriend, 19-year-old Brian Hawkins. Their accounts of that day are the same as Shauna's.
All 3 of them pretty much did not speak with us any further. And at that time, we did not have an injured person or a dead body. Without that physical evidence, we're missing pieces of the puzzle to put it all together. A little over 11 months after Frank's disappearance, I was contacted by the sheriff's office, and they indicated they were up in the Shingletown area, which is a good 24 miles east of Reading, up in the pine forest. 2 mushroom hunters stumbled across human remains, specifically bones from a skeleton. And at that point, they had also discovered some ID laying on the ground belonging to Frank McAllister. The skull was there, the jawbone was there, the teeth were there, there were ribs and vertebrae. The lower part of the body all had been scavenged by animals and the bones dispersed.
They found some dark-colored tennis shoes, a dark pair of jeans, and a sock. These were all consistent with the clothes that Frank was reported to have been wearing by Donnell when she made the missing person report 11 months prior.
Dental records confirm that the remains are those of Frank McAllister.
The forensic anthropologist discovered 2 knife wounds, one on the jawbone and one on one of the upper vertebrae.
It was evident from the markings on the spine that Frank McAllister's throat was likely slit. There were other marks in the spine that showed a knife had gone through and nicked the spine, consistent with having somebody over the top of you, stabbing you through your chest.
2 years after Frank is murdered, the investigation into the teen who never came home cools like the mist off Lake Shasta, and the case goes cold.
So in January of 2018, I'm 6 months in as a brand new reporter at KRCR. And I get this call from my grandpa. And I say, hey, Grandpa, I'm working, what's up? And he goes, well, I have this guy. He's got some information on this murder in Shingletown from 25 years ago. He wants to talk to you. And I'm thinking, I don't have time for this. But I hear him out. My grandma and grandpa go to church every Sunday, but my grandpa Tony on this Sunday had a man approach him saying that he had some things that he wanted to talk to him about and pray about, but specifically, he wanted to speak with him about Frank McAllister's death. And the man's name was Brian Hawkins. He sat down. And I said, so what'd you come here to tell me today?
I'm going to turn myself in next door at the sheriff's department for a crime I was involved in years ago. And somebody lost their life. It was murder. It wasn't my idea. Almost every minute of every day has been a nightmare.
I've been through hell my whole life because of this.
While I finished the interview with Brian, my boss was calling the police department and telling them, hey, we have these details. He's going to be bringing himself in. And they said, hey, there's 2 other people involved in this case. Can you hold off on airing this interview until we can go get them?
KRCR management agrees to delay airing Hawkins' confession for 24 hours.
My girlfriend at the time was Shauna Culver. She had an idea to, she wanted to murder Frank because he had money on him and he wanted to buy a quarter-pound of Frank.
Later that day, Frank shows up at the apartment, and Brian told Frank that he could be the middleman for that methamphetamine deal. The 4 of them get in Frank's car together. They get back to this real remote area, and they just sit in the car and talk for a couple of hours, and Brian tells me that Shauna kind of nudges him.
What exactly is she saying to you in the backseat?
To stab him.
She's telling you to stab him?
And that's when Brian tells me Curtis pulls his own knife out.
And who stabbed him
Curtis.
first? Curtis did from the front passenger seat?
Mm-hmm. I got on top of him and I stabbed him also in the neck. I don't know how many times.
Brian says he drives to Costco while Shauna and Curtis are inside making phone calls for a taxi. Brian tells me that he grabs like a newspaper and he's trying to wipe up blood the best that he can.
They gave me some money.
Money from Frank?
Yes. There was blood on it.
Brian told me that Shauna and Curtis gave him a few $100s and they essentially parted ways. My partner convinced Curtis to take a polygraph.
Were you physically present when Frank was killed?
No.
That was the greatest thing that ever happened. Curtis bombs it.
In November of 2019, Brian Hawkins came into court and pled guilty to murder and robbery and all the enhancements. He then was ultimately sentenced to 25 to life for first-degree murder of Frank McAllister. On January 14th of 2022, Shauna Culver pled guilty to her responsibility for the murder, to robbery and additional charges, and received 20 years in state prison. Curtis Culver pled guilty to manslaughter and robbery and various other assault charges, and he received 35 years in state prison.